A nationwide general knowledge contest for the title Brain of Britain 1998. The chairman is Robert Robinson.
Hello. It is find the encyclopedia and consult the index for most of us, but our contestants are the embodiment of both. They are, from the Midlands and East Anglia, Chris Standen, a computer operations analyst from Longworth, Abingdon, Kenneth Dommett, a customs surveyor, now retired, from Moseley, Mrs. Carolyn Pierce, who owns a craft centre, from Bakewell, and Hadrian Jeffs, a mature student from Norwich. We have as close to 10 seconds as our computer permits for you to answer, and 5 right in a row gets you 6, the extra mark. We start with Mr. Standard. In Swift's Gulliver's Travels, the land of little people is Lilliput. What is the land of the giants?
Brobdingnag.
Yes, it is. What is the name of the device invented by C.T.R. Wilson in which the tracks of charged particles can be observed because of condensation? Don't know.
Torus.
No. Now, Mr. Dommett?
Is it a cyclotron?
No. Mr. Jeffs?
Cloud chamber.
A cloud chamber is right, sir. It's Mr. Dommett's turn, who in London is buried in Westminster Abbey and in Paris beneath the Arc de Triomphe.
Charlemagne? Oh, sorry. It was just Charlemagne.
Whatever you said is... No.
Charlemagne, sorry.
No. Mrs. Pierce?
The Unknown Soldier.
The Unknown Warrior, same thing,
Oh.
yes. Mrs. Pierce, what is the word for an inhabitant of Monaco?
Monegasque.
Yes. A temporary replacement for a doctor or clergyman is known as a locum, which is an abbreviated form of which 2-word Latin expression?
It's probably wrong. Locum parentis.
No, locum parentis. I know what you in locum parentis. Mr. Standard.
Locum tenens.
Is right, sir. Mr. Jeffs, in the Times magazine, Brian Glanville listed his 100 greatest footballers of all time. His number 1 was Edson Arantes do Nascimento, who is better known by what name?
Pele.
Yes. What is the name of the malevolent housekeeper of Manderley in Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca?
Mrs. Danvers.
Yes. Near which town are there 2 golf courses, Royal St. George's and Prince's?
Deal.
No. Mrs. Pierce?
Is it Sandwich?
Yes, Sandwich is the one we were after. And that is our opening round. And I'll tell you how things are. Mr. Dommett has yet to score. 2 to Mr. Standen, 3 to Mrs. Pierce, 3 to Mr. Jeffs. Mr. Standen, for the production of what is the town of Grasse in Provence famous?
Perfume.
Yes. Of what was Charles James Fox speaking when he said how much the greatest event it is that ever happened in the world and how much the best?
I'm sure he said something about a dog walking on its hind legs, but I don't think it's that.
No, that was Dr. Johnson. You're surprised to see it done at all, and very much surprised to see it done well. Mrs. Pierce, like
French
a woman preaching. Sorry about that. I thought I'd get the politically incorrect bit in. Mrs. Pierce.
The French Revolution.
Yes, you're quite right. Mr. Dommett, what is the menorah, the emblem that appears on the national arms of Israel?
That's the candlestick.
Yes, it is. What is the Japanese, here we go, for a lovable egg? You know, people going around talking about lovable eggs. You've never heard it, I've never heard it, but apparently Mycroft has. And he's also heard the Japanese for it.
No, I haven't heard of it.
No, I'm with you, Mr. Dommett. I mean, we're together here. Mrs. Pierce.
Is it that Tamagotchi?
Now, just... Yes, it is. Oh, yeah. It's a programmable egg that children are given to annoy adults in schools because it goes off beep if they don't love it enough. It is not only repulsive, it is illogical. But I shall give no further speech on this matter. Mrs. Pierce, what is the name of the space telescope that went into orbit in 1990 but didn't work?
Hubble.
Yes. Which line of longitude does the international date line largely follow?
180.
Yes, which gas is generally used instead of CFCs as the propellant in environmentally friendly aerosols. Oh, don't shake your head.
Carbon dioxide.
No, you're absolutely right. Guess a gas. It wasn't that, Mr. Stanley.
Nitrogen?
No. Have a guess. Mr. Jeffs?
Freon.
No. Mr. Domit? I beg you not to be left out.
Argon?
No, butane is the answer. Mr. Jeffs, in which of Hardy's novels does the heroine marry Sergeant Troy and, after his death, Gabriel Oak, after Troy's death, Gabriel Oak, whom she had earlier rejected?
Far from the madding crowd.
You're right. Of which monastic order are Trappists a branch?
Benedictines?
No. Mr. Stanley?
Franciscans?
No. They're going down again like ninepins. Mrs. Pierce?
Dominicans.
No, Mr. Domit.
Carthusians?
Oh, missed it. The Cistercians, yes. Of course, you couldn't ask them the question I've asked you because they just wouldn't answer, would they? Quite right, too. 1 to Mr. Domit at the end of that round, 3 to Mr. Standen, 4 to Mr. Jeffs, 7 to Mrs. Pierce. Mr. Standen, can you complete the title of Defoe's novel, The Fortunes and Misfortunes of the famous...
Mole Flanders?
Yes. One of Gainsborough's best-known paintings now in the National Gallery combines a double portrait and a landscape. On the right is a field of corn. On the left, the couple who own the field. They give the picture its title. Mr. and Mrs. Robert... who?
Stubbs?
No. Mrs. Pierce.
Andrews.
Is right, sir. Yes, sir. I mean, madam. I do beg your pardon, Mrs. Pierce. It was the excitement I was overcome. Mr. Domit, why was the result of the 1945 general election not announced until 3 weeks after Election Day?
Was it because of the Yalta Conference?
No. Mrs. Pierce?
Was it to give the troops in the Far East chance to vote?
It was overseas, yes. It was to give the troops a chance for their ballot papers to be counted. Mrs. Pierce? Paul Getty went to Buckingham Palace in 1986 after he'd been awarded an honorary knighthood. Went there again in March 1998, apropos of the knighthood. What happened in March that didn't, indeed couldn't, happen 12 years earlier?
He became a British citizen.
No, that won't do us. That won't do us. Mr. Jeffs?
He was knighted.
Well, go on a bit, old thing.
Well, he was knighted properly and became Sir Paul
How do you
Getty.
get knighted properly?
Well, he was knighted because he was now a British citizen, so he became Sir Paul Getty, whereas he was just Paul Getty KBE before.
Just how was he knighted properly?
With the sword, by the Queen.
That's it. That's the one. Just wanted to get it out, you know. She tapped him on the shoulder, the accolade. You're quite right, he'd become a British citizen, but the thing that happened then was the accolade. Mr. Jeffs, Mark Twain found the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II so enchanting that he said he could happily live in it for the rest of his life. In which city?
Florence?
No. Mr. Standen?
Venice?
No. Mr. Domit?
Rome?
No. Now, Mrs. Pierce.
Milan.
Yes! Be shameless, that's what I always say. Good for Mrs. Pierce. Now, the scores are these. 1 to Mr. Domit, 4 to Mr. Standen, 5 to Mr. Jeffs, 10 to Mrs. Pierce. Mr. Standen, the first successful transplant of a human organ was a kidney in 1954 in Boston. Why were there no problems with rejection?
It was transplanted from one twin to another.
It was. At what inn did Chaucer's Canterbury pilgrims assemble before their journey?
The Bell.
No, Mrs. Pierce.
The Tabard.
The Tabard is quite right. It's Mr. Domit's turn. When Margaret Landon's book Anna and the King of Siam was filmed, the king was played by Rex Harrison, who played him both on Broadway and on the screen in the musical version, The King and I.
Neil Brunner.
Yes, indeed. One cause of the First World War was the French desire to regain the two border provinces annexed by Germany in 1871 after the Franco-Prussian War. France got them back in 1919, effectively lost them in 1940, and got them back yet again in 1945. What provinces were they?
Alsace and Lorraine.
You're right. The river which in the days of the Roman Republic separated Cisalpine Gaul from Italy has given a figure of speech to our own language. What is the river's name?
Rubicon.
Yes. What fictional speed record did the American journalist Elizabeth Cochran, pen name Nellie Bly, set out to break in November 1889?
Swimming in the channel.
No. Mr. Jeffs?
She went round the world in 80 days.
That's right, sir. You got it. Mrs. Pierce's turn. We have a piece of music and speech which originated in a film 60 years ago. You have to tell us who wrote the music. Who wrote the music?
A wild guess. Eric Coates.
No.
No.
Mr. Dommett?
Benjamin Britten.
You're right, sir. Benjamin Britten, well done. And the film, as you no doubt recognise, was Night Mail, documentary directed by Harry Watt and Basil Wright for the Post Office, words by W.H. Auden, read there by Nigel Hawthorne. The Britten music was played by the Nash Ensemble. Mr. Jeffs, under communism, Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, was known as Frunze, if I pronounce it correctly. Who was Frunze?
He was a Communist Party leader in the 30s.
I don't think that'll do for us, no. Mr. Dommett?
Was he a national hero?
I don't think that would do for us. You know, it's quite vague, that. Sorry to be so precise. Mrs. Pierce, Mr. Standen, no. He was a revolutionary general, is what we wanted, who fought in the Civil War, yes. End of the round, the scores are 5 to Mr. Standen, 5 to Mr. Dommett, 6 to Mr. Jeffs, 11 to Mrs. Pierce. Halfway along, and it's a listener's turn to bowl out our brains with 2 questions. Roger Price from Walthamstow asks, first, what profession did George Orwell take up when he left Eton?
He was a colonial officer in Burma.
Yes, he was, and you carefully didn't say exactly what or how, but he was an officer in the Indian Imperial Police Force, which you left out, but you're close enough, in Burma. So, right. Second question from Mr. Price. Which French author was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature and wrote of himself, quote, after many years during which I saw many things, what I know most surely about morality and the duty of man, I owe to sport.
Camus.
Yes, you're right. Well done. And although Mr. Price doesn't get his book token, he's had the chance of going to bat with the Titans, and he gets this round of applause. Mr. Standen, the chief distinguishing feature of the wood mouse, because it has many, evidently, gives rise to an alternative name, which is what?
Its furry tail.
No. Mrs. Pierce?
Has a long nose.
No, it may, or again, it may not. Mr. Dommett?
Big ears.
Oh, I don't think anyone could say that about the wood mouse. And if they could, I hope they wouldn't. Mr. Jeffs, I don't believe you had a turn.
He has big feet.
Big feet. I mean, big for a mouse, do you mean, or?
Generally big rodent wise. I mean, big feet.
No. No one's ever said that. You've all had a go now, haven't you? It's its long tail. It's the long-tailed field mouse. The tail is its chief distinguishing feature. Whether it thinks that, I don't know. Mr. Dommett, what does living over the brush mean?
Living over the shop.
No, Mr. Standen.
Living in sin.
Yes. Well done. Mrs. Pierce, some of the changes which so dumbfounded Washington Irving's Rip Van Winkle were the result of a major historical event through which he had slept. What event was that?
The American War of Independence?
Yes.
Oh.
Who was the engineer of Dutch origin, knighted by Charles I, who built the Great Ouse flood defences?
Cornelius van Leyden.
No. Mr. Jeffs?
Cornelius Drebbel.
No. I suppose there must be someone called that.
He invented the submarine.
What?
He invented the submarine.
Oh, my goodness. I not only dig holes for myself, but I dig them deeper and deeper and then jump in. Mr. Jeffs, I apologise, not only to you, but to the person you named. Mr. Standen.
Cornelius Schmidt.
No, nice try. Mr. Dommett, any idea?
Cornelius Lees.
No, it was Cornelius Vermuyden. Yes, and you were awfully, well, I don't think
I've not got that.
if I could speak Dutch, I wouldn't think you were very close. But no, it's Sir Cornelius Vermuyden. Mr. Jeffs, what in architecture is an engaged column?
There's a column that's joined to another column.
No. Mrs. Pierce?
Is it a column that supports another column?
No, that's more or less what Mr. Jeffs was getting at. Mr. Dommett?
Is it one which is part of a wall?
Yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. It's attached to or partly sunk into a wall, and there are other features, but that's absolutely right. The scores now are 6 to Mr. Dommett, 6 to Mr. Standen, 6 to Mr. Jeffs, 12 to Mrs. Pierce. Mr. Standen, which American state is nicknamed the Equality State because when still a territory in 1869, it gave women equal voting rights with men?
Alaska.
No. Mrs. Pierce?
Wyoming.
Is quite right. Mr. Dommett, which car manufacturer has owned Aston Martin since 1987?
Ford.
Yes, scarcely believable, is it? But there it is. Mr. Dommett again, David Shepherd's successor as Bishop of Liverpool is the Right Reverend James Jones, who is moving from being Bishop of where?
Hull, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Which Roman poet wrote of himself in translation, I have erected a monument more lasting than bronze and taller than the regal peak of the pyramids. I shall never completely die.
Virgil?
No? Mrs. Pierce?
Ovid?
No. Mr. Standen?
Trajan?
No. Now, Mr. Jeffs.
Horace.
Yes, Horace. There are 2 universities in Liverpool, Mrs. Pierce. One is the University of Fourth's Queen. Can you name either of the 2 ladies?
Margaret of Anjou.
Yes, Elizabeth Woodville being the other. Which English city's motto is Ave Mater Angliae?
Norwich.
No. Mr. Jeffs?
St. Albans.
No. Mr. Standen?
Ipswich?
No. Now, Mr. Dommett. Just pick a city. Oh, do pick a city.
York?
No. I was going to say very near, because it is, in a sense, Canterbury. Both have archbishops and they're, top of the tree and all like that. Yes, Ave Mater Angliae, Canterbury. It's your turn, Mr. Jeffs. The Caroline Islands, the Marshalls, the Kiribati, and some other island groups are lumped together by geographers under a collective name which derives from their small size. What is that name?
Micronesia.
Yes. What does the science of petrology deal with?
Petroleum-bearing rocks.
You had Mycroft on the hip there very nicely. He's got rocks, formation, structure, and mineral content, but who is to deny that some of the rocks have oil or petrol bearing? Yes, you're quite right. I think you outran him there. Mr. Jeffs, this Irving Berlin song we now hear was sung by Fred Astaire in a 1936 film, but it's become widely known in this version because of its use in a television commercial.
Nat King Cole.
It is indeed, sir. And the 1936 film was called Follow the Fleet. The first novel in Trollope's Barsetshire novels is concerned with the controversy over who should be warden of a so-called hospital, a home for old men in the city. What is its name?
The Omnium Hospital.
No. Mr. Standen?
The Barchester Almshouse.
No, that's lovely. That's so likely. Mrs. Pierce shakes her head. Mr. Dommett is thinking. Hiram's Hospital is the answer. And that brings us to the end of the round. The scores are now 6 to Mr. Standen, 8 to Mr. Dommett, 10 to Mr. Jeffs, 15 to Mrs. Pierce. Can you tell us, Mr. Standen, which American president defined a statesman as a politician who's been dead 10 or 15 years?
Eisenhower.
No. Don't think he was quite clever enough to say things like that. Mrs. Pierce?
Thomas Jefferson?
No. Mr. Jeffs?
Teddy Roosevelt.
No.
Lincoln.
No, it was Harry Truman. Mr. Dommett, at the time of the Anglo-Saxon conquest, what part of this country was known as West Wales or West Welsh?
Cornwall.
Yes. What is the usual English name for what the Scots call, if indeed you have ever heard a Scotsman call it this, a tatty bogle or tatty booty?
A ghost. A spirit.
No. Mr. Standen.
A Swede.
Do you mean from that country?
As in a vegetable, Swede.
Aye, it's a tatty bogle, and I don't speak Swedish. No, oh, you mean a Swede-type Swede? No? Mrs. Pierce?
Potato?
No. I know the logic is impeccable, but the answers are wrong. Mr. Jeffs?
It's a young haggis.
I like the thought. It's a scarecrow. I just don't believe it. Anyway, that's it. It's now your turn, Mrs. Pierce. What name is given to the relatively sheltered stretch of water that lies between Deal and the Goodwin Sands? Half time, Mr. Dommett.
The Narrows.
Not the Narrows. Mr. Jeffs?
Is it the Kentish Knock?
No. Mr. Standen, have a go.
The Lees.
No, the Downs is the answer. Whose turn? Yes, Mr. Jeffs. Terence Rattigan wrote Playbill, a pair of one-act plays. One, called Harlequinade, was largely forgotten, but the other's been filmed twice. Once in 1951 with Michael Redgrave, once in 1994 with Albert Finney. What's its title?
The Browning version.
It is. What was remarkable, indeed, a first, when K.R. Narayanan became President of India in 1997?
He was untouchable.
Yes, he was the first untouchable to hold the post, but I think the answer was contained in what you said. Which future Queen of England had her childhood home at Hever Castle in Kent?
Anne.
No.
Anne Boleyn?
Anne Boleyn, yes. Anne is right, but Anne is wrong. Anne Boleyn is right. Yes, Mrs. Pierce, you're absolutely right. The end of the round, the scores, let me tell you. 6 to Mr. Standen, 9 to Mr. Dommett, 12 to Mr. Jeffs, 16 to Mrs. Pierce. Our last round begins. Mr. Standen, which country in 1980 adopted a new national flag consisting of a horizontal green, white and red tricolour with God is great? 11 times, the phrase 11 times on both the green and red stripes and its coat of arms on the white stripe.
Libya.
No. Mrs. Pierce?
Iran?
Yes. Mr. Dommett, the profession followed by Ibsen's character Halvard Solness provides the title for the play in which he appears. Which play?
Master Builder.
Yes. There are 2 cities in Germany called Frankfurt. One is on the River Main. On which river does the other stand?
Oder.
Yes. What does a bird do when it fledges?
Grows its feathers.
Yes. What is the hometown of Fred and Wilma Flintstone?
Rock something, right?
Yeah, Mrs. Pierce?
Bedrock?
Bedrock is what you were trying to think of, Mr. Dommett. It's Mrs. Pierce's turn. What natural disaster in 1755 is said to have prompted Voltaire to write his novel Candide?
A plague?
No. Mr. Standen?
It's a volcano on Martinique.
No. Mr. Dommett?
The Lisbon earthquake.
Yes, sir, you're right. Mr. Jeffs, Malmsey, Circeal and Boal, or Bual, are all types of what kind of wine?
Fortified red wines.
No. Mr. Dommett?
The sweet fortified wines from Madeira.
That's exactly what they are. Well done, sir. Right on the post, right on the finishing line. They are Madeira, you're right. And let me tell you now, the final scores, they are 6 to Mr. Standen, 12 to Mr. Jeffs, 14 to Mr. Dommett, 18 to Mrs. Pierce. Mrs. Pierce is our winner, and we all congratulate her. She goes forward to our semi-finals. Next week, we have 4 contestants from the northwest of England. Until then, goodbye.